Yeah, I was kind of wondering what that was, and then I just never got around to figuring it out yet.
Yeah.
So.
Well, the thing is, because it doesn't seem like it's anything. It just says voice memo.
If you want a clear definition of biodiversity, you can look to the 1992 Rio Convention, which says essentially that biodiversity is difference at all levels of scale. Whether it's between species, between ecosystems, genetic biodiversity, it takes into account from the genome to the ecosystem and says difference is good, right? But I also feel that it's not so important anymore for me to have a very clear definition. So there is a definition, but I think the more important thing is to have open discussion about it and use it as a tool. And one of your questions too is like, what's exciting about fungi? And it's this one area in biology that deeply embraces life from the micro to the macro, and in a way that the organisms occur at the microscopic level and at the macroscopic level. So, you have very small plants, but not such a diversity of them. And then it's a new area of conservation that's really emerged only since the mid-1980s, and so that's really interesting. Like, why did it come up then, and who popularized it, and what does it mean to be a whole kingdom or functional group of organisms to only recently be on the radar for conservation? And that because of the history of mycology as a discipline, they have a particular history in relation to amateur communities and local knowledge that's actually much more inclusive than floral and faunal conservation, which I think is really interesting. And that because of the sort of cutting edge of mycological research, it's forcing us to engage with some of these core biological concepts that we thought were fairly stable, like what's an individual, or what's a species, or how to assess biodiversity when you only have named approximately 5 to 10% of the estimated 1.5 million species. And this is why it's sort of tricky, right, when you start to get into this domain between science and policy, because science is supposed to be objective and apolitical. And if you come in as I and many of my colleagues do and say, look, the decisions that you make as a scientist are political on some level, and they have political effect, and it will actually help you to be I try to argue with my colleagues that it will help them to be more aware of the political dimensions of their decisions, because then there are also politics in those moments, and to be aware of them actually helps you make more informed decisions about the type of research that you want to do and where you want your research to go, right? Because you have control over your research to some extent until you finish it and you publish it, and then you don't know what's going to happen. So I think part of our ethical work as academics is to take into consideration what could happen with the information that we put out into the world, and to think about that as we create that information and as we craft it for the people that we want to communicate it to. And I don't think that anything that you do could be worse from taking a little time and doing that.
What are some things that have been missing in the efforts to make good policy?
To be honest, I think that one of the biggest things is that the people that are in power need to yield in a real way. They need to yield power to other people. Now, the tricky part about that is, who are these other people going to be? How are they going to be chosen? And will they want to step up to the task, right? Because it's all well and good to say, hey, we want to have a more inclusive management plan, but this is what you're going to have to do to put your time into contributing to it. But I guess that's my hope anyway, is that everyone, if you find the people that are truly invested in something and truly care about it, then generally they have sort of similar ideas. Or you sort of find that they have different ideas for very significant reasons.
What is a concept that you think about all the time in your field that is really important that you wish everybody knew?
To me, the idea that all knowledge is situated within cultural and social contexts would be what I would want everyone to think about. Like, deeply think about that everything that, not to say that it's not real or that doesn't have truth in it, but to say that you, as the filter for that knowledge, whether you're a scientist or a guy on the street or whoever you are, that comes into play, and just be aware of it. And so that's this concept of situated knowledges, which is popularized by Donna Haraway. And I think it's a really powerful line of social theory.
We want to be able to sit there and have epistemic debates about things, but is there a way that you can integrate that in a practical sense into our policy? Because I think that's the thing that a lot of people struggle with, is this idea of, yes, we have all these complicated issues, and then we spend time thinking about it, but all we end up is understanding exactly how complicated they are, which I think gets frustrated when people say, well, are we going to build the road or not? You know, so it's like, so I mean, so is there some guiding principles that you think of, ways that you can use that to shuttle along better decision making, better conversation?
There's certain things that you're always going to return to. One is who has the power to make the decision, whose voices are heard in the decision making process, and what are they saying? What they're saying based on? What's their motivation? In terms of the road, this happened in a town near where I grew up, that there was a wetland, and they wanted to build a road through the wetland because it was going to make it way easier to get to this other highway, right? So, like, it was going to sort of, instead of, like, for where we live, instead of having to go through, over the mountain and through the town and on the highway all the way to the grocery store, which was like a 40-minute drive in traffic, you could just take this little back road, take this little highway through the wetland, and you're there in 15 minutes. So it seems great, right?
Yep.
And it was a big controversy at the time because of exactly what we're talking about. And they won, and they built the road, and, okay, I was too young to sort of be up on it in the way that we're thinking about now, but because it was like an economic thing, and it would bring more businesses to the area, and they said, no, we're going to, like with a lot of wetlands and highways, they said, we're going to build this road here, but we're going to build a wetland over here, which is insane from an ecological standpoint, right? But in that case, if they had said, well, you know what, it's not just going to be the road, but then they're going to build a hotel, then they're going to build a gas station, then they're going to build this, like, state building over here. So, in fact, the original wetland that we told you that we were going to rebuild over here is not going to cut it. And we're going to tell you now that given the proposed development for this area, we actually can't relocate that much wetland. Even if the wetland works, even if this crazy idea that you can just rebuild a wetland in another place is sound, which we already know it's not, if you take into consideration sort of the projected economic development fully, it changes the whole perspective. So, it's how you tell the story becomes really important.
Well, it's kind of interesting because it's almost like the biggest thing here is almost that you're allowed to have a different value system, which I think is almost immediately dismissed in a lot of these conversations. The idea that there is an alternative. So I almost feel like the insight in your comment there is that the market value economy is not the only value system that's valid.
Yeah. I agree. So what if we gave those other value systems more weight?
And the thing is that it's a bad economy and people don't have jobs. What good is the wetland going to do if you have people out of work?
Right. So you come back again to, like, which value system are you using? Whose metrics are the ones that have the power to shape the discourse that we're having? So all you have to say is jobs. It has, with no context, and that gives you a very specific idea, right? Of, oh my God, jobs, we need jobs. But if you say, well, it's going to make actually 200 jobs, they're going to be for 6 months, and they're going to pay $7 an hour, then that's a very different discussion, right? So even with 3 additional data points, if you want to think about it like that, you have a totally different context for your discussion. And honestly, if I thought that it was going to create, 200,000 jobs flat versus 600, it's like a no-brainer, right?
Yeah.
I'm still not convinced that for me, I would say, okay, 200,000 jobs working in an oil pipeline is the way we want to go.
I feel like what I'm arriving at from talking to you is this idea that the knee-jerk is that anytime you delve into complexity, it just sort of makes things worse, right? Like, complexity is not pragmatic. I think is sort of that dovetailing. And even interdisciplinary is almost not pragmatic because but I think it's interesting, but it's looking like when well applied, by addressing the complexity and from coming at it from a couple different perspectives at once, you're actually opening up more options that were initially either unclear or counterintuitive.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to look at it. The terms that people use are like creates an opening for,
Mm-hmm.
or you know, the possibility becomes, or the if we change our entry point to this, then we come at it from this different angle, and so we just have a different perspective. If you look at something head on, you see a different perspective than if you look at it from the side.
Mm-hmm.
So, following what you just said, if you look at it from the front and the side, you have twice as much information, right?
Yeah.
So, in terms of the species and biodiversity and conservation and all that stuff that we're thinking about, I mean, what I'm so excited about the project that I'm doing right now is that because of my expertise and Anne's expertise, we're really thinking about this issue of species from like hyper complicated, molecular biology positioning, and also this like hyper complicated, social critical theory position, and trying to think about those together in a way that gives us new insights into how to think about biodiversity and how to think about biodiversity conservation. I mean, to me, what I want people to take away from discussion of biodiversity is to be bothered about it. I want them to think about it more. I want them to like really try to work it out for themselves. Why is it important to have these things on the planet? And what would we lose when we lose them? And do you need to, I don't know, like, do you even need to have a reason, or can you just sort of dig deep in yourself and have some sense that some things are right and some things are wrong? Like, that eating an entire bag of Oreos is probably not good for you. People do things that are bad for themselves all the time. Whether it's eating a whole bag of cookies or throwing herbicides on your lawn or not fighting for biodiversity. So, to me, that's the interesting question.
Mm-hmm.
And if we can try to figure out that, then work on those things, then maybe we can move in a different direction. The social science process is saying, here's what we have, here's the social systems that we have in place, here's the institutions that we have because of those social systems, here are the effects. So you do try to maintain some level of objectivity, right, and say, here are the effects of those systems that we have. Then you say, well, what do we think about these effects? Because, I mean, eventually you have to bring it back to yourself, right, or to the people around you. Are we pleased with these effects, or are we displeased with these effects? What might we do differently? Who's suffering? And how do we feel about it? I do think that it's pretty clear that everyone feels better when they feel that they have been listened to, honestly heard, and taken into consideration. And I think as much as you can do that at the local level and at the regional level to some extent, and if people have confidence in their delegates, then, even at national and global levels, that you can make a lot of headway like that.